if you all have been paying any attention. It's going to be a very interesting General Assembly, and this is interesting in the sense of the Chinese curse of may you live in interesting times. We are engaged in a national imbroglio, argy-bargy. It's not a debate. I think we're all pretty well certain where we want to be. It's just how we talk to each other, and the processes that we use in getting there are very contentious, and I will tell you all about that in a little bit, but I just wanted to precede my reflection with that introduction that we are headed into this great discussion that has seized our tradition. Now, before we get there, I think it might be necessary to come to the present through a very rapid gallop through the past. So buckle up. This is, in some ways, the history of Unitarian Universalism in 12 minutes, saving 8 more for after the break. The theme here is that in our tradition, one of the things that I've noticed in my very sort of armchair study of it, I mean, I would not call myself a historian of Unitarian Universalism by any means. I did have to read the history to go through seminary, but I'm not an expert. But as I was reading that history, one of the things that really stood out to me was that many times in our history, we have moved forward as a tradition, or as traditions that became a tradition, through conflict. And we are having a conflict right now. I hope it moves us forward. So I want to take you through some of these conflicts to demonstrate this. One of the very first ones was what's called the Arian controversy, and it's called the Arian controversy because it was about a guy named Arius. So we're talking in the 300s AD, and Arius was more or less, I don't know if he was the first, but he was the most vocal Unitarian at a time when there was no real church doctrine. Everyone was kind of figuring it out as they went along. There was actually no codified Bible. There were books that were floating around, but the Bible as we know it was not formed yet. There were all kinds of different practices and understandings of the gospel and of Paul's letters. So Arian comes along and says, I'm reading this stuff and I see one God, and I see that Jesus was not divine, and I see the Holy Spirit, but I don't think they're all indwelling, they're not all the same thing. And other folks were saying, actually no, there are 3 in 1, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, indwelling with each other, and it got really heated. I mean, people were hurting each other physically, and meanwhile, the Emperor, Constantine, was seeing that this was having, because Christianity at that point had spread throughout the region, and it was having a damaging effect on the empire. Constantine came in and said, stop your fighting, let's have a General Assembly. And come together, and you all will talk about it, and these people will vote. I'm the emperor, I'm not going to vote, but I'm the emperor. So Arius lost that debate. Praise be. Because from that point forward, Constantine came in and made of Christianity a state religion. And to my way of thinking, Christianity went off the rails at that point. Not necessarily a theological claim that it went off the rails, but it got mixed up with the state of Rome, and for many centuries it was the Holy Roman Empire. So we lost, which was great, because it kept the blood off our hands for a little while longer. Oh, and that was the Council of Nicaea, by the way. So the Nicene Creed comes out of that, a creed which we obviously do not say, being non-creedal and non-dogmatic. Okay, skipping ahead about 1,200 years to Europe, there was a fellow named Michael Servetus. Very similar argument. This time he was taking Calvin, who had set up his holy city on a hill in Geneva. And Calvin, of course, was about as far away from a universalist as you can get. He believed in predestination, that you were saved, it had nothing to do with what you did in life. God had chosen you beforehand to be saved. And he was also, but in this case, I'm sorry if I confuse you, this was not a debate about universal salvation, but Michael Servetus comes along and says he's also a Unitarian, and of course Calvin is quite the Trinitarian. They had a big letter writing campaign. Calvin says, whatever you do, next time I see you, you're going to get it. And then Michael Servetus went to Geneva and was like, come get me, and then Calvin did, and burned him at the stake. So, you know, maybe not a good decision to go to Geneva. But certainly a man of conviction. And I'm not sure if that conviction or his petulance led him back to Geneva, because he was a very irritating person. But, you know, aren't we all? And Geneva is a much nicer place today, I can tell you. But he is one of our early martyrs. And in fact, interestingly enough, I discovered that he is also claimed as a spiritual ancestor of Jehovah's Witness for the Unitarian aspect of his argument. Okay, so we lost again. We lost again. Then we skip forward a great deal, well, about 200 years, 200, 300 years. And now we're in Boston. And yay, go Sox. This is the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The Great Awakening is happening in America, and people are going crazy. And it's like a dead show. They go to all these people travel to listen to these ministers. These ministers preach for 3 hours, at the end of which everyone is in a state of ecstasy. Can you imagine? Should we try that someday? And meanwhile, our anal retentive religious ancestors are like, no, that's not how we do this thing called religion. We have a cultural problem with that, and we also have a theological problem with that. We don't think that God operates in that way. And so these become eventually, not because of that necessarily, but because they're reading the Bible in the original language at this point. Last time I was here, I think I talked about Elizabeth Peabody having translations of the biblical texts, or having the original of the biblical text what people could read in Greek and Hebrew. And also we have now archaeological evidence, we have historical analysis that we could apply to the Bible. And out of this, people are arriving to, again, a Unitarian conclusion. Now there's some irony, because a little bit later, you know, part of the Unitarian reaction was to that 3-hour Grateful Dead show. And we said, no, we're going to be more true to our Puritan roots in culture. And then a few years later, as he was saying sayonara, well, goodbye anyway, to the Unitarians, in his Harvard Divinity School address, Ralph Waldo Emerson called us corpse cold. So, at any rate, Unitarianism took a stand in Boston, and after a little while, every preacher in Boston was a Unitarian. Every preacher. So that was a very successful, for a while, part of our history. But it came about, again, in this confrontation with the overarching culture. And in fact, we came out of the congregational tradition, and for a long time, we thought we would be fine. Unitarian and Trinitarian can both be in the congregational church together. And that was fine with us. We were fine with being in church with Trinitarians, and guess what? We still are. But the Trinitarians saw it a little differently. And so they said, well, you have to leave. And then most of our folks looked at the deeds to the property and said, actually, you have to leave. And so they did. They formed, that's how Andover Newton actually was formed as a reaction against the Unitarians keeping the silver. And Harvard. They started Andover. The Trinitarians did. Okay, so again, a fight. This time we kind of won for a while. Okay, so then, but within the, I'm just thundering through, the Unitarian, after a while, there was the National Unitarian Conference, had a fight against what was going to become known as the Free Religious Association, along with the Western Unitarian Conference. And this was a battle between, that emerged out of the Transcendentalist movement, that sort of rose up and settled back down, but still left many Unitarian Universalists, or Unitarians, as a strange mix of idealist, mystic, rationalists, which actually I think still is a very good description of us. It's a strange mix to be idealistic and mystic and rationalist. But I feel that would identify me fairly well. And so it was those folks, so the vestige of the Transcendentalists, versus the Unitarian Christians. And the result of that was a conference at Saratoga, New York in 1894, when, after a lot of arguing through pamphlets and whatnot, and magazines, that all the churches would accept the religion of Jesus, holding, in accordance with his teaching, that practical religion is summed up in love to God and love to man. So there's actually quite a bit of wiggle room there. What this absolutely did was sort of obliterate the notion of any authoritative test of faith. So at this point, creeds and dogma were off the table. It also ended the primacy of Christianity in Unitarianism. So we accept is an important verb, the religion of Jesus. Doesn't make any claims about Jesus one way or the other. Holding in accordance with his teaching. So not a whole lot about miracles. And that practical religion, so an emphasis on the rational and practical, is summed up in love to God and love to man. Okay, so that was another argument within the Unitarians that was actually had some resolution in a kind of compromise, but the trajectory of that still was one that carried us into a sort of post-Christian era, or so post-Christian meaning include but evolve. So that was the Unitarians. The Universalists also had their fair share of evolution through conflict. Shortly after they got their footing in America, there was a giant debate that lasted for many, many years that was about the Restorationist versus the Ultra-Universalist. Okay, so Universalism is about salvation, right? Do we know that? Okay, lie to me if you don't. Say yes. Okay, so the Universalists said everyone goes to heaven. Everyone goes to heaven. God, a loving God, would not create creatures to send to hell forever. That does not equal a loving God. So the Universalists, and they read this, and this is all, they would fight about verses in the Bible. This verse said this, so I'm interpreting it this way. This verse said that, I'm interpreting it this way. So these are all biblically based arguments all the way through. So this was our sort of Universalist champion, Hosea Ballou. He was an ultra-Universalist, meaning that the Restorationists thought you would be restored after a period of time of punishment if you were a bad person. If you were that bad. You would go to hell, at least, damn it, for a little while. And then God would bring you back after you've served your time. But Hosea Ballou even thought that was beyond the imagining of a loving God, and found his Bible verses that he thought would support his idea. And he said that no, everyone goes, everyone is reconciled right away. And it just so happened that that sort of devalued salvation in the afterlife. If everyone gets saved in the afterlife, it kind of doesn't matter that much about the afterlife anymore. And so that camp started drawing the notion of salvation into the material world, which the Restorationists thought was not good business. And so they had a big fight. It lasted for many, many years. And it actually was settled sort of by attrition and fatigue. After a while, they were like, I don't think I want to talk about that anymore. I think we've all said what we're going to say, and we've tried to split up over it, and that kind of didn't work, so I guess we're stuck with each other, so let's just agree to disagree about this and keep going. So, that being said, however, and even though Hosea Ballou is our Universalist Papa Bear, in the 19th century, nearly all the Universalists were Restorationists. So, even though we sort of claim and have lived into this sense or the legacy of ultra-Universalism, at the time, he kind of lost that debate. As a matter of fact, in a Universalist history for young people, which was written in the early 20th century, there was a tract in there that claimed that the Restorationist controversy was the only debate that Ballou ever went into that we wish he had kept out of. But the main thing that came out of that, after a while, was the shift in salvation theology from being one that emphasizes the afterlife to one that emphasizes this life. All right, moving into the present. 1960s, very tumultuous time. There were riots. Some of you were there. Not at the riots. Was anyone at a riot in the 60s? You guys? You were? So there were riots in the 60s. There was even a council, a Unitarian Universalist council, this is after the merger, that had, the title was something like, Council to Respond to the Black Rebellion. So like, rebellion is a really strong word, right? But there were people actually fighting in the streets in some cities. So it had that sense in the air, and then black leaders were getting killed, and this was all in the air. 1967 and 68, there was a Black Unitarian Universalist caucus. They demanded that the General Assembly endorse, without amendment or debate, a series of proposals calling for African American representation on the UUA board, Executive Committee, and Finance Committee, subsidies for black ministers, and most remarkably, the creation of a UUA-affiliated Black Affairs Council, called the BAC, to be financed at the tune of $1 million divided over 4 years. Okay, so the UUA rejected the demands of BUUC. We're getting into alphabet soup here, I apologize. But they did create a Black Affairs Council And the UUA board created a racial justice fund with the goal of $1 million over 4 years. But it wasn't funded from the UUA. It would be funded with the UUA's help in fundraising, but it wasn't a line item. It did not fund the BAC, Black Affairs Council, directly. Then GA got a hold of it, and GA, our General Assembly, not the UUA board, the General Assembly voted to fund BAC. And they voted to reaffirm that commitment every year, to have that come up for vote every year. However, this is very complicated, but it's important to our present, and we're going to go over it. I hope you're okay with that. The General Assembly, that means you and me, basically, we were not aware of the financial crisis that the UUA was in at that time. And we had just voted to spend $250,000 a year of $1968 to an endeavor that we felt very strongly about. But that's a recipe for some problems. And that recipe came out hot. I mean, that was, it happened. We had problems. So the proposal after these problems were revealed was that we split that money over 5 years instead of 4, and to have that reaffirmation. This gets very dramatic. I know it's kind of dry, but it gets very dramatic in a bad way. I wish it hadn't. I wish it would stay dry. So at GA, they were going to vote to reaffirm the every 4-year thing, or to have it be split over 5 years. And the BAC said, we noticed that this agenda item is set for Wednesday, or whatever, like the last day of General Assembly. This is important. I think Martin Luther King had been assassinated months in advance of this, right? So tensions were extremely high. And they said that this was important enough to move to the first day of General Assembly. General Assembly voted not to move it. Some people at that point literally put microphones in their shirts, under their jackets, to basically bring General Assembly to a halt. Okay, so that day passed. The next day, all the members of Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus, when it was voted to not be moved up, they walked out of General Assembly. So General Assembly, you gotta imagine, there's like 2,000 to 4,000 Unitarian Universalists there. I don't know how many BUUC members there, that's Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus, but they walked out. They were joined by about 400 other Unitarian Universalists. And they went down to a church down the street. And that day, the UUA, and this is what the history books say, made overtures. I have no idea what that means at this point. I'm not a historian. Made overtures, got them back in, and GA amended the agenda, General Assembly amended the agenda, and reaffirmed their commitment to the 4-year plan, which was then undone months later by the board. And they split up into 4 to 5 years. But even then, there was internal arguing in the BAC. They had differences in strategies, direction, and loyalties, and they kind of frittered away, and were left in an argument about who gets the money. So this was an attempt at addressing, the legacy of oppression that we have in America that did not go well in our association. However, we like to think that we learned some things from it, and maybe the things that we learned from it we're going to be able to apply in our current struggle. And that would be in keeping with the way that we do business. We often lose or don't get it right, but we move the needle. We're right up against it, and do you guys want some music, or you want me to keep talking? This is democratic. So I got about 5 more minutes. I can keep talking, or you can listen to music for 3 minutes, and then I'll talk for 5 minutes. Talking? Okay. All right, so now we have our current conflict, right? This is our current conflict. This is where we stand right now. Katie's gonna, in lieu of music, Katie will play the air conditioning. The current conflict began was drawn into the light, perhaps, when a regional head, who many of us know, Reverend Andy Burnett from Chandler, was hired to be, the minister was hired to be the regional lead in the southern region. And one of the other candidates for that position wrote an open letter saying that she was told that she was told that they were going to deliberate about who was the best fit for that position, and then she learned that she didn't get the job. And to her, that felt like a setup for institutionally racist process. Not that the people involved were making that decision consciously. I don't think she alleges that, but she did point out that we have a systematic, demonstrable homogeny at the level of a leadership that she was applying to, and they're all white people. And that began a discussion that got very heated very quickly, and resulted in, and by heated I don't mean from one side. I mean it was heated from both sides of the accusation side and the defensive side. And our president, I think, reacted. There was a lot of reactivity going on all over the place. And the people that had official position had to resign, felt that they had to resign. So our president of our association resigned. Our chief executive operating officer resigned. The chief of staff of the MVUU, the person who made that hire, a man who actually is responsible for us doing the Baja 4 work, he resigned. And Reverend Andy Burnett, decided he could not take the position of regional lead, and thank goodness his church voted to bring him back, because he had already told them that he was moving on, but they voted to bring him back. So it's, there's a lot of obvious and immediate damage to people, actually, that I know, and that hurts and it breaks my heart. But there's also this legacy of damage that has led up to this moment that we should not overlook. So I've always noticed that, conflict surges us forward, and I couldn't wait for the next conflict. I thought it would be theological in nature. I thought I would be involved. This is somewhat theological in nature, but mostly it's cultural, and it's justice, right? So, and in some ways, there's a terrible joke. We could say we're back to the Aryan controversy. Yeah, thank you. I'm here for 5 more minutes. And the terms that are emerging from this are difficult terms for us to grapple with. We've got terms like white supremacy and white privilege. And I don't think that those are perfect terms. They're not perfect terms. I don't know what the right term is yet, or the term that's going to be best for this congregation to adopt, but the one thing that those two terms do is point to the problem being something that is internal and cultural that becomes systematic and institutional. So the work isn't necessarily only that of an affirmative action hiring program. which the UUA does have. The work is us looking in the mirror as individuals, as ministry groups, as congregations, and as an association, and seeing the legacy of colonialism that we live into and often benefit from at the expense of others. And it is a tricky road. It is fraught. There are often times when there is no right thing to do, where every move that you make is going to piss somebody off, justifiably, and you still have to make the move. So that's going to be some choppy waters that as an association we get to navigate. My hope is that we move the needle, and that this time the needle is moved within us, ourselves, the way that we look at the world, the way that we rewrite the history of our, not only denomination, not only congregation, but our culture, because the change will have been within us as individuals. There's a lot at stake here. And so people get impulsive and reactive and frustrated and angry quickly. So we must pray for patience, generosity of spirit, resiliency, understanding, and bigger ears and mouths. What is at stake is our tradition, our country, our history, our identity, and our feelings. Because who we thought we always were as Americans and as UUs is currently in question. And that is a good thing. You know, we always say, oh, UUs, what the sacred symbol of UUs is the question mark, because we're questioning everybody else. Right? Well, now it's time to turn the question on ourselves. So earlier we heard a poem where we were praying for a safe place to be. And I love that. That was a beautiful poem. Thank you for reading it. But that line caught my attention because the way that things are being framed right now is that there are no safe spaces, that we don't want a safe space to be, that we want a brave space to be. Because it's going to take courage to do this self-reflection. It's going to take courage to reform our tradition. It's going to take courage to stay in the conversation when you're getting ouches. It's going to take courage to not lose your patience. So what I hope is that we can keep that finish line in sight. That our way may be slow, that it may be difficult, but that it can be even joyful. And I have seen that too recently in discussions with colleagues, that this work can be joyful. And I'll close only 5 minutes late with a poem from a man named Yehuda Amakai called The Place Where We Are Right. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once